Peace at last. The latest Middle East ceasefire finally brings calm to Gaza. Surveillance over Syria. Will U.S. airstrikes against Islamic State militants come next? Human trafficking arrest. A Vatican official weighs in after 18 Libyan migrants die en route to Italy. And fewer pilgrims. The ancient St. Catherine's Monastery in Egypt's Sinai region losing visitors. Those stories and more on EWTN News Nightly for Tuesday, January 26th, 2014. Good evening from Washington, D.C. Thanks for joining us. I'm Brian Patrick with your news now. We're learning more about ISIS, or the Islamic State, tonight. A 26-year-old woman is now the third American known to be in their custody. Her name's not being released, but she was an aid worker in Syria when captured last year. Meanwhile, the U.S. military is now flying surveillance missions over Syria, an ISIS stronghold. Wyatt Goolsby reports tonight.
Brian, officially, both the president and the Joint Chiefs of Staff say they are still weighing their options in how to handle jihadist militants who have overrun parts of Iraq. But according to several unnamed U.S. officials, surveillance has already begun.
In the last month, the U.S. has launched dozens of airstrikes in Iraq against the militant group, the Islamic State, or ISIS. The U.S. argues it's to protect Americans and prevent a humanitarian crisis. But Pentagon officials have said the only way the terrorists can fully be stopped is to go after them where they originally came from, in neighboring Syria.
Was in fact originally an offshoot, a franchise, if you will, of Al-Qaeda. So it was the Syrian element of Al-Qaeda that was fighting against the regime of Assad.
Counterterrorism expert Sebastian Gorka says while most of the focus has been on Iraq, jihadists are fighting to bring the entire region, including Iraq and Syria, under one Islamic State.
Rooting out a cancer like ISIL won't be easy and it won't be quick.
The White House says they will not provide military support to Syrian President Bashar al-Assad, who has been fighting the militants in his own country. Assad's abusive and near total control over the country led to the civil war there. While it's not ideal, Gorka says the U.S. will have to work with regimes like Assad's if they want to eliminate the threat.
So this will be a ground fight to destroy the jihadi organizations, but I don't think it is one that American troops will be the front line of. This has to be solved by local actors, by Arabs and Muslims.
Meanwhile, a top Syrian official says any U.S. airstrikes in his country without consent would be considered an act of aggression.
Pentagon officials today once again said they have no plans to provide military support to Assad's government. On the topic of spy planes flying over Syria, the Pentagon says they have no official comment and will not discuss intelligence matters. Brian?
Thank you, Wyatt. Some of the other stories our EWTN News Nightly team has been covering in today's world. A long-awaited, unlimited ceasefire between Israel and Hamas started midday today. Celebrations in the streets of Gaza when the announcement came down, and our Susie Pinto reports.
All sides have finally agreed to a ceasefire truce to end the months-long fighting between Israel and Hamas militants in Gaza. The Egyptian-brokered negotiation calls for an end to violence with no expiration date.
A day of the victories for our people, for our resistance.
According to a senior Egyptian government official, here are the terms of the deal. Israelis and Palestinians will ease the blockade on Gaza, open the border crossings for humanitarian and medical aid, extend the fishing limit off the coast to 6 miles, and finally, both sides will come back to Cairo for more negotiations.
Our delegation spoke with one voice in all languages. Yes to the national unity, yes to the Palestinian unified Palestinian position, yes to resistance.
A senior Israeli government official says Israel once again accepted the agreement, referring to an earlier ceasefire agreement from July. Tuesday marks the 50th day of Israel's Operation Protective Edge, an effort to stop rocket attacks and close down Hamas tunnels in Gaza. The United Nations reports 67 Israelis, including 64 soldiers, have been killed. More than 2,130 Palestinians have lost their lives. Susie Pinto, EWTN News Nightly.
Israeli police are searching for a missing New Jersey man who disappeared near Jerusalem. The 23-year-old rabbinical student, Aaron Sofer, was hiking in a forest and didn't return last Friday. Police are trying to determine if he was with someone else or hiking alone at the time. They're also looking into the possibility he may have been abducted. That concern echoed today by his congressman at a New Jersey news conference.
There are concerns, as we all know, about the possibility of an abduction. No claims have been made, and that's a good sign, but claims aren't always made immediately by abducting parties, particularly Hamas.
Congressman Smith says the U.S. Embassy is working with police to find Sofer. 3 Israeli teens were abducted by Hamas in June. That's what triggered the weeks of fighting between Israel and Hamas. Federal judges in Chicago heard arguments today about reinstating voter-approved bans on same-sex couples marrying in Indiana and Wisconsin. The 3-judge panel pressed attorneys defending those bans, asking how they help society, especially children of same-sex couples. In June, a lower court ruled traditional marriage laws in those states are unconstitutional. The presidents of Russia and Ukraine are meeting face-to-face today as forces loyal to each side continue fighting. It was the first meeting between Vladimir Putin and Petro Poroshenko since Poroshenko was elected in February. In a speech at the summit, Putin pledged to defend Russia's economic interess. Ukraine's decision to align with the European Union over Russia as trading partners has sparked months of violence. Italian police have arrested a suspected human trafficker after discovering a boat with more than 70 migrants and nearly 20 corpses on board. The Italian Navy found the boat Saturday, moving the bodies and the survivors ashore. These migrants are just a fraction of the more than 100,000 people who have already reached Italy this year, most fleeing violence in North Africa. Italy says it's spending $13 million a month on patrols to intercept the migrant boats before they reach land. The Vatican's representative at the UN in Geneva tells EWTN News Nightly it is instability and conflict in Libya that's driving migrants from their homes.
The migrants that have accumulated there in the hope of moving to Europe are forced out, are forced to take a chance and cross the Mediterranean anyway.
Archbishop Tomasi made the comments Monday while in Italy for the annual meeting of Communion and Liberation. That's a lay Catholic movement founded by Father Luigi Guisani. The Ebola virus is now gaining a foothold in another part of Africa. The Democratic Republic of Congo is now reporting around 120 deaths from the virus. Twice that many people have been infected as the country faces a severe doctor shortage. America's Center for Disease Control director says Ebola has the upper hand in the outbreak that has hit parts of West Africa, but he says it can eventually be contained. The World Health Organization today also says the outbreak has infected an unprecedented number of health workers who are trying to contain the disease. So far, almost 1,450 people have died from the Ebola virus. Cardinal Edmund Shoka is laid to rest today in Michigan. His massive Christian burial was celebrated at the Cathedral of the Most Blessed Sacrament in Detroit. He died of natural causes last Wednesday at a Michigan hospital at age 86. Cardinal Shoka led Detroit area's Catholics as their archbishop. Later, he served as the governor of Vatican City. He was a confidant of St. John Paul II and a strong supporter of EWTN's Mother Angelica. Coming up, schools face unique issues educating homeless kids. We explore those challenges. And we visit the ancient St. Catherine's Monastery at the foot of Egypt's Mount Sinai. On Tuesday, August 26th, this is EWTN News Nightly. I'm Brian Patrick, and a new report from the United States Government Accountability Office, the GAO, reveals big problems with government programs for homeless students. The GAO recommends that the Department of Education improve its oversight of the program that, by law, are required to identify and educate homeless youth. The investigators interviewed 20 school districts, finding that 8 of them had problems identifying homeless students. Across the board, public school workers cited similar challenges, including the cost of transporting homeless students, the stigma associated with homelessness, and having limited staff and resources. So exactly what are these challenges that schools face trying to reach and teach homeless children? Tonight, Jason Calvi has some first-hand perspective from a school counselor.
Thank you for quietly lining up waiting for Miss Harris.
Jeffrey Brown used to patrol the streets of D.C. as a police officer. Now he's helping children at a local public school. Brown is a school counselor here. It's not just backpacks weighing on the kids' shoulders. Some don't have a place to call home.
Last year, I had at least a half dozen families in my office with tears in their eyes saying, Mr. Brown, what are we going to do? We've been evicted.
But not all will admit that they're homeless. Brown says the hardest part is figuring out which kids don't have a home.
Look at the clothing. Who's really hungry? Who's hoarding food? Who has the same uniform on?
Last year, 15 students here at Ann Bears Elementary School were homeless. Now, that doesn't mean that the students are living on the street. It could mean they're in a homeless shelter, temporary housing, or a cramped, unsafe building.
On one hand, you're saying you got to get here every day, you got to get here on time, but I'm sleeping in a car.
This cop-turned-counselor helps the kids with uniforms, gift cards for food and clothing, but he can't help with housing. In Washington, Jason Calvi, EWTN News Nightly.
Thank you, Jason. Kay Brown is the lead author of the U.S. Government Accountability Office investigation into the homeless education program. Thank you so much for joining us. There's so much to talk about. Practically speaking, what would you say is the main thing that stands in the way of schools reaching and teaching these homeless kids?
Well, I think one of the most important things is identifying the kids, as you heard already. We know that from the 20 districts that we went to, that stigma is a significant problem. Families may be reluctant to talk about their situation, and particularly older youth are reluctant. And in addition, they may be concerned about the involvement of government agencies, maybe Child Protective Services or immigration officials. And if we don't know who the homeless youth are, it's difficult to serve them.
So is this correct that your report mentions that schools are financially incentivized not to identify homeless students, yet the law requires them to teach them? How do you get around this?
Well, you're right that the law does require that any student, any homeless student, receive the same free and appropriate public education as any other child. And schools, the program that we're talking about here is $65 million that goes out to states and then to some districts, but not all districts. And because of that, some districts are expected to serve students but don't receive any funds. And some of the types of services that they provide, particularly transportation, we found could be very expensive.
So does that mean more money would help? Are these schools underfunded?
You know, it's really tricky. Many of these families have multiple needs, and I think the challenge that the districts face is, once they've identified the students, helping them to connect with the right resources in the communities. And that might be health care, it might be dental care, it might be mental health services, but there are programs out there that these kids can be connected to. The biggest challenge that the districts face that we heard about was transportation when it comes to cost.
What do you mean by that? Obviously, schools provide buses to pick kids up in their neighborhoods. How do you pick up people when you don't know where they live?
Well, that's the way the law is written. If a child is in a different district, they have the right to go to school in their home district if it's in their best interest. So the schools have both a cost and a logistical problem trying to figure out how to serve these kids. They may give them taxi vouchers if they're older, or public transportation. They may have to reroute some of their buses. So it's a challenge for them.
Do you have recommendations for the Department of Education in terms of changes that might be made?
Well, the Department of Education is responsible for making sure that the states are monitoring the school districts and applying the requirements of the law appropriately. And what we found was that the monitoring that the Department of Education has done over the past several years has dropped significantly. And without that monitoring, they don't really know what is happening at the state level and at the district level. So our recommendation to them is that they develop a new, more comprehensive plan to reestablish their monitoring program.
Is there any way that we can help in some of these districts where they're probably underfunded anyway, where a lot of these kids are supposed to go to school?
One of the things that we heard from districts, and particularly districts where there were natural disasters that they were dealing with when kids were homeless, was the role that the community plays. The community has stepped up in many ways to provide everything from backpacks to extra food to support to families. So there are things that the community can do, as well as the agencies that are funded in the community in order to help these kids.
And simply not stigmatizing them,
Right.
reaching out to them as brothers and sisters. Kay Brown with the GAO, thanks for joining us tonight.
You're welcome.
Appreciate it. Well, Egypt's tourism industry has been hit hard by 3 years of turmoil, but visitors still come daily to the world's oldest working Christian monastery, paying their respects to a beloved saint. Our Catherine Elliott has more.
From the 6th century, St. Catherine's Monastery lies at the foot of Mount Sinai in Egypt. The rugged, sun-bleached area is sacred to 3 of the world's major religions: Christianity, Islam, and Judaism.
We have the original dedication to the burning bush, to the prophet Moses, to the prophet Elijah, the later dedication to the Transfiguration. But because the relics of St. Catherine were brought to the church here after her martyrdom, many pilgrims came here from the West, purely out of veneration for St. Catherine, and they're the ones who began calling the monastery St. Catherine's Monastery.
Catherine of Alexandria lived in the 4th century. She converted to Christianity after receiving a vision of Mary, giving her to Christ in a mystical marriage. She spent her life converting others to the faith during a period when Christians were brutally persecuted. Many visitors to the monastery are Russian Orthodox tourists. They come here to venerate Catherine's relics and see the many icons of her that have been given to the church over centuries.
We can get 500 Russians here every single day, and all of them know of the veneration of Imperial Russia for St. Catherine. We have many gifts given by the emperors and the empresses of Russia, and even if they don't know much about the monastery, when they come here, they see these imperial donations, they realize that Sinai is a place where Russians have been coming for centuries, and they have an enthusiasm for the place.
According to tradition, the Christian martyr's remains were taken to Mount Sinai by angels after her death. Catherine Elliott, EWTN News Nightly.
Up next, a lot of glitz, but few surprises at Monday night's Emmy Awards honoring television's best. And as science and medicine help us live longer, we look at adding life to our years. We appreciate you joining us for EWTN News Nightly on this Tuesday evening. I'm Brian Patrick. It's become television's most prestigious night. The 66th Primetime Emmy Awards brought out the stars in L.A. last night. The Emmys aired on Monday in August instead of Sunday in September, so they wouldn't compete with Sunday's football lineup. Comedian Seth Meyers hosting the show for the first time. Besides that, this year's Emmys could have been a rerun. Breaking Bad won Outstanding Drama for the second time. Modern Family took Outstanding Comedy Series for its 5th consecutive year. Bryan Cranston of Breaking Bad won his 4th Outstanding Actor in a Drama Emmy. Juliana Margulies got her 2nd Emmy in Outstanding Actress in a Drama for her role in The Good Wife. Outstanding Actor in a Comedy going to Jim Parsons in his The Big Bang Theory role for the 4th time. And Julia Louis-Dreyfus got her 3rd consecutive Emmy for Outstanding Actress in a Comedy for Veep. No awards for Dr. Patricia Phalen, but she is an associate professor of media and public affairs at George Washington University. The Emmy Awards produced very few surprises. Do you think that these really reflected what the viewers like?
It depends on what you mean by reflecting the viewers. If you talk about the majority of viewers, definitely not. It reflects basically what Hollywood likes, I think, and there are very strong audiences for the shows that won, but they're not as large as some of the ones that don't even get nominated.
I'm curious at what you think. Do our viewing choices reflect our culture, or is it the other way around?
I think it's pretty complicated, but I would say that viewing choices don't necessarily reflect the culture. I think I'm saying that incorrectly, but Hollywood really does determine a lot of what our culture is. And just because people choose to watch a particular show doesn't mean that that's going to influence Hollywood in any way.
Talk a little bit about Breaking Bad. Big winner again last night. Now the show's over.
Right.
So why is it ending if it's so great?
Oh, I think it ran its course. It had a very good run and a natural ending. So I am sure that there were many reasons for it, people wanting to go on to do other things. Maybe stories ran out, I don't know. But I would say that Breaking Bad just had a very good run, and it was time to end the series.
So it's been 66 years that we've been awarding prizes for primetime television. Prime time isn't prime time anymore. Any time is prime time.
That's right.
Netflix, for example, had a bunch of nominations. No wins this year, but do you think Netflix will continue to aggressively compete with cable and other sources?
Absolutely. And not only Netflix, but also Amazon is starting to produce its own content as well. So it's definitely going to make a big difference in the television landscape.
Well, why not? When people are, able to pick and choose and watch on their devices. There were some comments at last night's awards about what a great time this is for women in the media. You don't agree so much.
Well, I don't. I think maybe everything is relative in a certain sense. So it was, I believe, Juliana Margulies who said this is a great time for women in the media. And maybe compared to other years, there are more parts for women. But when you think about it, the roles that women play on television are still really very sexist. I mean, you have their mistresses, you have witches, they received many nominations for American Horror Story Coven, and I'm not sure that that's a great part for women. I mean, I'm not sure that that's a big advance for women. So.
And television, as a rule, lacks class. I guess the awards didn't do any better, did they?
Well, it's funny. I think the externals were very classy. I think there was a lot to recommend that show in terms of classiness. However, what they talk about is really kind of superficial very often. And for my own taste, I'm tired of the stupid sex jokes and innuendos that belong, I don't know where, but definitely not in primetime television coming from our stars.
And you teach Hollywood and politics.
I do.
Talk about it, maybe a missed opportunity here that they could have really addressed some key issues, some things that are really important.
Right. I think one thing we saw was how effective someone like Ryan Murphy has been in advocating the cause for research on HIV/AIDS, right? And he has really pushed for that, and he's done a great job. It was mentioned many, many times during the show last night. But I was really surprised that there weren't more mentions of the political state of the world, which now everyone is agreeing is so horrendous. No one mentioned, for example, James Foley. And people would disagree with me, I think. Some people would disagree with me that the Emmys are not the place to make political statements, but They make them anyway. They make them anyway, and this would have been the year to talk about the persecution of minorities in northern Iraq, to talk about what's happening in Afghanistan, to really sort of bring people together and say, yeah, we know what's going on in the world, and we care, and we are going to take a stand on it.
From George Washington University, Dr. Patricia Phalen. Pat, thanks for joining us.
Sure.
Well, staying physically active and eating healthy may help us live longer, but new research shows that the quality of those years is more nurture than nature. Yeah. Turning 70 didn't slow Molly Darden down. Instead, she went water skiing.
I decided that I'm going to sail through the 70s, facing challenges exuberantly.
One secret to Molly's healthy aging, her longevity attitude.
It's a mix of feeling that you are in control of your health, buffering stress, keeping positive human relationships, and keeping a very positive attitude.
Research shows 25% of aging is determined by genetics. Recent studies show much of the rest is in our hands and often comes down to lifestyle and our outlook.
People who have a positive image of aging will live 7.5 years longer.
Molly has always embraced life. She worked as a journalist and photographer and lived overseas. Now she says she's connected with others through her own website and on Twitter. And she stays fit by gardening and walking her dog.
It's a passion to be happy. It's a passion to be vibrant, zestful. It's a passion to do good in the world, because I know now that I'm in my home stretch of life.
Molly's positive lifestyle not only adds years to her life, but life to her years. And that's a good thing. Thank you for joining us tonight. I'm Brian Patrick. For all of us at EWTN News Nightly, good night and God bless you.